The marble floors of the Wellington mansion echoed with each hesitant step Elena took. At 19, she had never imagined her life would lead to this moment, walking through corridors that felt more like a museum than a home. The wedding ceremony had been a blur of expensive flowers, designer gowns, and the cold, calculating gaze of her new husband, Marcus Wellington. The 32-year-old billionaire had barely spoken to her during their brief courtship, if it could even be called that. Their families had arranged everything with the precision of a business merger, which, Elena realized, was exactly what this was. Marcus had built his empire on steel and silence, known throughout the city as the man who never smiled, never showed weakness, and never failed to close a deal. His penthouse office overlooked the financial district like a throne room, and everyone who entered left feeling smaller than when they arrived. Elena had heard the whispers, that he was heartless, that his first marriage had ended in tragedy, that he'd sworn never to love again. As she stood in the foyer of what was now her home, surrounded by portraits of stern-faced Wellington ancestors, she wondered if she would become just another cold fixture in this beautiful, lifeless house. The staff moved around her like ghosts, their eyes downcast, speaking in whispers. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, had shown her to the master suite with the efficiency of someone accustomed to navigating around her employer's moods. Elena noticed how even the servants seemed to hold their breath when Marcus was near, as if his very presence demanded a different kind of oxygen. Tonight would be their wedding night, and the thought sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the mansion's impressive air conditioning system. Marcus stood in his study, staring out at the city lights that twinkled like distant stars. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. He had agreed to this arrangement not out of desire for companionship, but out of duty to his family's legacy and the complex web of business relationships that required this union. His grandfather's will had been clear: marry within 2 years or lose controlling interest in Wellington Industries. Elena's family needed the financial security this marriage would provide, and Marcus needed a wife. It was a transaction, nothing more. The young woman who now bore his name was beautiful. He couldn't deny that. Her dark hair caught light like silk, and her green eyes held a depth that unsettled him in ways he refused to acknowledge. During their few meetings before the wedding, she had been quiet, respectful, everything a proper wife should be according to the antiquated expectations of their social circle. But Marcus had seen something else in her gaze. Intelligence, perhaps even defiance, carefully hidden beneath layers of propriety and fear. He had built walls around his heart with the same methodical precision he used to construct his business empire. After Victoria's death 5 years ago, he had sworn never to allow himself to be vulnerable again. Love was a liability he couldn't afford, a weakness that had nearly destroyed him once before. Elena would have a comfortable life, want for nothing material, but she must understand that his heart was not part of the bargain. He had made that clear to her father during the negotiations, though he suspected the message hadn't been passed along to the bride. As the clock struck 10, Marcus knew he could no longer delay the inevitable. His new wife would be waiting, and duty demanded he fulfill his role in this charade. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and prepared to play the part of a husband, while keeping his soul locked safely away. Elena sat on the edge of the enormous 4-poster bed, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from trembling. The master bedroom was a study in masculine elegance, dark wood, leather accents, and artwork that spoke of wealth and taste, but revealed nothing of the man who lived here. She had changed into the white silk nightgown her mother had selected, feeling more like a sacrifice than a bride. The mirror across the room reflected her image back at her, and she barely recognized the frightened young woman staring back. Her mother's words echoed in her, "Be good to him, Elena. Remember what this marriage means for our family." The weight of her family's financial troubles had been placed squarely on her shoulders, and she understood the unspoken message. Her happiness was secondary to their survival. Her father's business had been failing for months, and Marcus Wellington's intervention was the only thing standing between them and complete ruin. She was the price of their salvation. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her pulse quicken. She stood, smoothing down the silk that felt foreign against her skin, and waited. The door opened with barely a whisper, and Marcus entered. In the soft lamplight, he looked different than he had during the ceremony. Less like a marble statue, and more like a man carrying invisible burdens. His dark suit had been replaced with a simple white shirt and dark trousers, but he still moved with the controlled precision that seemed to define everything about him. Elena. His voice was softer than she expected, lacking the cold edge she had grown accustomed to. For a moment, neither of them moved, the space between them filled with unspoken expectations and mutual uncertainty. She noticed that he stayed near the door, as if he too was struggling with what came next. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Marcus studied his bride's face in the gentle lamplight, noting the way her hands clasped and unclasped at her sides, the rapid rise and fall of her breathing, the brave tilt of her chin despite the fear in her eyes. She was trying so hard to be strong, and something about her courage in the face of what must feel like an impossible situation stirred something deep within him that he had thought permanently buried. This was not how he had imagined spending his wedding night, feeling like a predator stalking prey in his own bedroom. "Are you comfortable? Do you have everything you need?" The questions sounded absurd even to his own ears, but he found himself genuinely concerned for her well-being. She nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly, and he recognized the response of someone trying to avoid giving offense. He had seen that same careful compliance in business meetings, the way people responded when they feared the consequences of honesty. He moved to the window, putting distance between them, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. "Elena, I think we should discuss expectations." His voice carried the same tone he used in boardroom negotiations, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized how wrong they sounded. This wasn't a business deal, despite how it had been arranged. This was a young woman's life, her future, her dreams, or what remained of them after being bartered away like a commodity. "I understand this isn't what either of us would have chosen," he continued, still facing the window, "but we find ourselves bound together nonetheless. I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever else this marriage may be, you will never have cause to fear me." The words carried more weight than he had intended, and he wondered if she could hear the promise beneath the formal language. Not just that he wouldn't hurt her, but that he would protect her from anyone who tried. Elena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders at his words, though confusion took its place. This wasn't the cold, calculating man she had expected. There was something almost gentle in his tone, a consideration she hadn't dared hope for. She took a tentative step closer, emboldened by his promise of safety. "I don't know what you expect of me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother told me to be a good wife, but she never explained what that meant to someone like you." Marcus turned from the window at her words, struck by her honesty. In his world, people rarely spoke so directly, especially not to him. Everyone had an angle, a hidden agenda, something to gain or lose. But Elena's admission held no manipulation, no calculated vulnerability designed to elicit sympathy. It was simply the truth, and he found it more refreshing than he cared to admit. "Someone like me," he repeated. And for the first time in years, Marcus found himself truly looking at his own reflection in another person's eyes. What did she see when she looked at him? A monster? A stranger who held her future in his hands? The man who had purchased her like a beautiful object for his collection? The thought made him feel sick. "And what do you think someone like me expects?" Elena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since he had entered the room. "I think you expect me to be seen and not heard, to be grateful for the privilege of bearing your name and asking nothing in return, to be a perfect wife for public occasions and invisible the rest of the time." Her words were delivered without accusation, but they hit him like physical blows. She had described exactly the kind of marriage he had thought he wanted, and hearing it spoken aloud made him realize how hollow and cruel it would be. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Marcus found himself at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated, forced to confront the reality of what he was about to do to another human being in the name of duty and self-protection. Marcus moved away from the window, his composure cracking for the first time in years. Elena's words had stripped away his carefully constructed justifications, leaving him face to face with the truth of what this arrangement really meant. He wasn't just protecting himself from vulnerability. He was condemning an innocent young woman to a life of emotional imprisonment. The realization hit him with unexpected force, and he found himself struggling to maintain the emotional distance that had become second nature. "That's not," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that revealed more frustration than he intended. "Elena, I won't pretend this situation is ideal for either of us. But I don't want you to feel like a prisoner in your own home." The words sounded inadequate even to him, but they were the beginning of something he hadn't expected. Honesty. Elena watched as the mask of cold control slipped further, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. For the first time since their engagement had been announced, she saw him as something other than an untouchable force of nature. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried burdens she couldn't imagine. "Then what do you want from me?" she asked, and the question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus met her gaze, and for a moment, the barriers he had spent years constructing seemed to tremble. "I don't know," he admitted, the words torn from him with visible effort. "I thought I knew. I thought I could keep this simple, businesslike. But standing here now, looking at you—" He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Elena asked, taking another step closer. She could see the internal war playing out across his features, the struggle between the man he had trained himself to be and something else, something more human, fighting to emerge. The question forced Marcus to examine assumptions he had never bothered to question before. "I expected someone who would be content with the arrangement," he said slowly. "Someone who would be grateful for the security and status and not ask for more. Someone who wouldn't—" He paused, searching for words to describe something he was only beginning to understand himself. "Someone who wouldn't make you feel," Elena finished for him, and the accuracy of her observation struck him like a physical blow. She had seen through him with devastating clarity, identifying the fear that drove all his careful calculations. "You're afraid," she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "Not of me, but of what I might mean to you if you let yourself see me as more than just an obligation." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. This 19-year-old girl had read him like an open book, seeing past the fortress he had built around his heart straight to the vulnerable core he had spent years hiding. "You don't understand," he said. But even as he spoke, he realized how weak the protest sounded. "Then help me understand," Elena replied, moving closer still. "Tell me about her, the woman who hurt you so badly that you decided never to feel again." She saw him flinch at her words, saw the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides, but she didn't back down. "Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're not protecting me by keeping your distance, you're protecting yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt exposed in a way he hadn't experienced since Victoria's funeral, when he had stood at her graveside and sworn never to open himself to that kind of pain again. Elena was offering him something he had convinced himself he didn't want, the chance to be known, truly known, by another person. The terror and longing that realization brought was almost overwhelming. "Her name was Victoria," he said finally, the words seeming to surprise him as much as Elena. "And you're right. I am afraid." Elena felt something shift in the air between them as Marcus spoke his first wife's name. The admission seemed to cost him enormously, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. She had expected anger at her boldness, perhaps dismissal, but not this raw vulnerability that made him suddenly seem younger than his 32 years. "She died in a car accident," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We had been fighting that morning about something completely trivial. I can't even remember what it was now. She left angry, and I let her go because I was too proud to apologize. The last words I ever spoke to her were in anger." He moved to sit heavily in the leather chair by the fireplace, his composure finally cracking completely. Elena felt her heart break for this man who had been carrying such guilt and pain alone. Without thinking, she crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, her hand hovering just inches from his. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "Accidents happen. Love doesn't come with guarantees that we'll always have more time to make things right." Marcus looked at her in surprise, struck by the wisdom in her words. "How can you possibly understand? You're barely more than a child yourself." But even as he said it, he realized how wrong he was. The young woman kneeling beside him possessed a depth of empathy and understanding that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the quality of her heart. "Maybe I haven't lived as long as you have," Elena replied, "but I understand loss. I understand what it feels like to have your choices taken away, to feel powerless against forces bigger than yourself. And I understand what it's like to build walls to protect yourself from more pain." She paused, studying his face. "But I also know that walls that keep pain out also keep love out. And that's not really living. That's just surviving." Marcus stared at Elena in amazement, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since their engagement had been. This wasn't the naive girl he had expected to manage and dismiss. This was a woman of remarkable strength and insight, someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly but had somehow retained her capacity for compassion and hope. He realized with startling clarity that he had been given something precious, and he had almost thrown it away without even recognizing its value. "I told myself I was being noble," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "keeping my distance, not asking more of you than necessary. But really, I was being a coward. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I was willing to hurt you instead." The admission felt like removing a physical weight from his chest, but it also left him feeling exposed and uncertain. Elena's hand finally made contact with his, her fingers intertwining with his larger ones. The simple touch sent unexpected warmth up his arm and straight to his heart. "We're both scared," she said simply. "I'm terrified of spending my life invisible to the man I'm supposed to share it with. You're terrified of letting yourself care about someone who might leave. But maybe we could be scared together instead of alone." The suggestion hung in the air between them, radical in its simplicity. Marcus found himself considering possibilities he had ruled out before even meeting her. What would it mean to truly share his life with someone? Not just the public appearances and formal obligations, but the quiet moments, the fears, the dreams he had stopped allowing himself to have? "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, gesturing helplessly between them. "It's been 5 years since I've tried to connect with anyone on more than a surface level. I may have forgotten how to be anything other than what people expect me to be." Elena smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Then we'll figure it out together. We have time." The conversation that followed stretched deep into the night. Marcus found himself sharing things he had never told another soul. His fears about living up to his father's legacy, the loneliness that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore, the dreams he had abandoned after Victoria's death. Elena listened without judgment, offering insights that consistently surprised him with their depth and perception. In return, she told him about her own dreams deferred, the art history degree she had been forced to abandon when her family's financial situation deteriorated, her love of literature and travel, her secret fear that she would disappear entirely into the role of Marcus Wellington. As she spoke, Marcus began to see the vibrant, intelligent woman behind the careful composure her upbringing. "I wanted to see the world," Elena confessed, curled up in the chair across from him with her legs tucked beneath her. "Every museum, every ancient ruin, every place where human beings created something beautiful and lasting. I had plans, you know, a fellowship in Florence, maybe graduate school after that. But plans change." There was sadness in her voice, but also acceptance that spoke to her resilience. "They don't have to," Marcus said suddenly, surprising himself. "Change completely. Why couldn't you still pursue art history? We could travel, for business, for pleasure. I've seen half the world, but always through conference room windows and hotel suites. Maybe it's time I actually experience some of it." The idea excited him in a way nothing had for years, the thought of sharing new experiences with someone whose joy and wonder hadn't been worn away by cynicism. Elena's eyes widened at the suggestion. "You would do that? Support my education? My interests?" The hope in her voice made Marcus realize how completely she had expected to sacrifice everything for this marriage. "Elena," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "I'm beginning to think we might be able to build something neither of us expected. Not the cold arrangement our families negotiated, but something real, something worth having." As dawn approached, they found themselves sitting closer together, the formal distance of the early evening gradually giving way to something more intimate and natural. Marcus had shed his jacket and tie, his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than Elena suspected he had in years. She had tucked her feet up under her, the silk nightgown draped elegantly around her, feeling for the first time since their engagement, like she was exactly where she— "I have a confession," Marcus said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When I first saw your photograph before we met, I thought you were beautiful, but I was angry about it." Elena raised an eyebrow in question, And he continued, because beautiful meant complicated. It meant I might actually want things I had sworn off wanting. It would have been easier if I could have remained completely indifferent. Elena laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the quiet room. Well, I'm glad you found me complicated. I was terrified you would find me boring. She paused, studying his face in the soft morning light filtering through the windows. Can I ask you something? What changed your mind tonight? When did you stop seeing me as just an obligation? Marcus considered the question seriously. When you called me afraid, he said finally. No one has dared to challenge me like that in years. Everyone handles me so carefully, tells me what they think I want to hear. But you looked straight at me and told me the truth about myself, even though you had every reason to be cautious. That took courage I didn't expect, and honesty I didn't know I was hungry for. The admission hung between them, raw and real. Elena felt the last of her fear dissolving, replaced by something she had never dared hope for, the possibility of genuine partnership with the man she had married. So what happens now? She asked softly. Marcus reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her palm. Now we start over. Properly this time. I'd like to court my wife, if she'll have me. The weeks that followed transformed both of their lives in ways neither had imagined possible. Marcus began coming home earlier, eager to continue the conversations that had started on their wedding night. He took Elena to galleries and museums, watching her face light up as she shared her knowledge and passion for art. Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminding him why he had fallen in love with beauty and creativity in his youth before business had consumed all his attention. Elena flourished under his genuine interest and support. She enrolled in graduate courses, began planning research trips, and slowly began to believe that her dreams didn't have to be sacrificed to her marriage. They could be enhanced by it. Marcus proved to be an attentive listener and an enthusiastic companion, surprising her with his quick wit and unexpected romantic gestures. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on a foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. The physical intimacy came naturally when they were both ready, a culmination of emotional connection rather than mere duty. Elena discovered that beneath Marcus's controlled exterior was a passionate man capable of great tenderness, while Marcus found that Elena's gentle strength could heal wounds he hadn't even realized were still bleeding. The change in Marcus was evident to everyone who knew him. His business associates noted that he seemed more decisive, yet more collaborative, his anger replaced by calm confidence. His household staff began to smile again, responding to the warmth that Elena brought to the mansion and the obvious happiness of their employer. Even the mansion itself seemed to come alive, filled with laughter and music and the sound of two people building a life together. 6 months after their wedding night conversation, Marcus surprised Elena with tickets to Florence. For your research, he explained, but his smile told her it was about much more than academic pursuits. It was about shared adventures, new discoveries, and the joy of experiencing the world through each other's eyes. A year later, Elena stood in the same bedroom where their marriage had truly begun, but everything had changed. The space that had once felt cold and imposing now felt like home, filled with evidence of their shared life. Books on art history stacked on the nightstand, photographs from their travels displayed on the dresser. Marcus's reading glasses folded next to her jewelry box. The formal distance of their wedding night had given way to easy intimacy and deep contentment. Marcus entered the room behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. "Remembering our first night?" he asked, his voice warm with affection and "I was terrified I would say the wrong thing and send you running back to your parents." Elena laughed, leaning back against his chest. "I was terrified you would say nothing at all and leave me wondering what I had gotten myself into for the rest of my life." She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "Thank goodness we were both brave enough to be honest." "Thank goodness you were brave enough for both of us," Marcus corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I might have spent years hiding behind walls if you hadn't knocked them down that first night." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I love you, Elena. I know that wasn't part of the original arrangement, but I need you to know that what we have now is real. It's the most real thing in my life." Elena felt tears of joy prick her eyes as she reached up to cup his face in her hand. "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I ever imagined possible when I walked through these doors as a stranger. You gave me everything I thought I was giving up. Love, Partnership, adventure, dreams. You gave me myself back, and then you gave me us. Their story had begun with duty and fear, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to open one's heart even when it seems impossible. They had discovered that the best love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing to build something perfect together. Thank you so much for listening to our story of Elena and Marcus. We hope their journey from strangers bound by duty to partners united by love has touched your heart as much as it has ours. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from our audience around the world. Your support and engagement mean everything to us as we continue to share stories of love, growth, and second chances. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them.